All right. Well, this morning I was able to get up early this morning and participate in the World Healing Day meditation, or World Peace Meditation, as I call it, which is the last day of the year, the 31st of December every year at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, which is noon Greenwich time. And John Randolph Price, through the Quartus Foundation, started this event. I think the first year they had it was 86. I think they began planning in 84, but they actually held the first one in 86. And the idea was simply that they chose noon at Greenwich time because at that instant, the entire planet is on the same day. You know, any other minute of the day, and half of the planet is today, and half is yesterday, or half is tomorrow, depending on where you are, which side of the international date line. But at noon Greenwich time, the entire world comes together. Metaphorically, it comes together. And John Randolph Price invited people to come together in consciousness, to pray, to meditate, to visualize, to chant, to just be still, to do whatever practice is one is accustomed to, and to do it simply for the purpose of experiencing peace, to recognizing the peace in the world. And Rory and I started doing it back in the 80s when we lived out in Denver. And that was very early in the morning out there. I think it was 5 o'clock we had to get up out there. And I just want to share with you that one morning we got together and we were doing this. And during this meditation for peace, I had this image come through my mind. I won't say as a vision, it's not like a prophet or a prophetic vision, but I had this image come into my mind. And I saw the Berlin Wall coming down, and I saw the people walking across the two sides of the border and shaking hands. And then a few years later, it actually happened. It was just tremendous to sit back and go, wow, wow. So what we want to remember, the reason I bring that up is that we are spiritual beings, each and every one of us. And everything we experience by right of consciousness. And if we wish to see a change in the world, we must first experience that change in consciousness. Gandhi said we must become the change we wish to see in the world. And the world that we live in talks about peace, but it doesn't really practice peace, not to a great extent. We can find it if we look for it. We can find people who are trying to be the instruments of peace, but I'm talking about nations, governments, statesmen, politicians of all political parties, of all denominations, of all countries. They tend to talk of peace as peace being something that happens to us. Peace is something that is either imposed upon us or it is taken away from us. In other words, as Spinoza said, the world thinks that peace is the absence of hostilities, the cessation of hostilities. Peace is that period in between wars. In the human experience, that's true. There's a period of war. Then there seems to be a time when everybody gets worn out from that. We go into a relatively peaceful period for a few years, and then we're back at war. And of course, that has kind of changed since in our lifetime, since the 60s. We're almost in a state of perpetual war now. Somewhere on the globe, there's a conflict going on, and somewhere in the globe, we're involved in it. Our young people are involved in it. We have to understand that even though we talk of peace, we are engaged in a belief that is not peaceful. We collectively are engaged in activities that are not peaceful. So this peace that we speak of, this peace that passes understanding, is something that we truly have to be willing to become. And it's very hard because we look at the world and say, but there are people there who would do terrible things to us. And of course, there are people who will say the same thing about us or our side, whatever side that happens to be. And we must come to realize then that the world is acting out of fear. We're acting out of this belief that somebody else is going to harm us. And we can't have peace because of that. We must have war. And we've been going about it this way since history began, since long before recorded history. But since recorded history began, some of the earliest written records that we have of human history are war records. They're about great battles. The great leaders were the great warriors. We remember Alexander the Great's name. These different conquerors. So our entire human history is geared towards remembering war, remembering war. The statues in our squares, the names of the streets and the highways, and important bridges, all of these things we use to commemorate warriors and war. What that tells us is we have to understand that the consciousness that we live in, the consciousness of the human race, as it exists today, as it has existed for thousands of years, is a consciousness that believes in the necessity of struggle. It believes in the necessity of war. And if we are to experience the peace that passes understanding, we have to individually, you and I as an individual, we have to be willing to take our consciousness out of that race consciousness or collective consciousness or human consciousness. We have to be willing to find that peace within us and let that peace come forward. And it's not an easy task. It's not an easy thing to accept. Many times people will say, but what about everybody else? What about all those people who would take advantage of me? What about all those people who might harm me? And we have to recognize that if we are willing to stay in that consciousness, we will never have peace. So the first thing that I want us to consider, or I invite us to consider about peace, is that peace starts in consciousness, in our thinking, in our believing. And if there's to be a change in the consciousness of the world with regards to peace, it must begin with a change in consciousness. And that change begins right here, right now. It begins with me. That's we sing the song, the peace song we used to sing on Sundays, let there be peace in the world and let it begin with me. We have to let it begin right where we are. We have to be willing to be the one to make the difference. We have to be willing to let go, excuse me, of our victimhood and accept the responsibility for our own consciousness. And that, I think, is the key point. Accepting responsibility for our own consciousness is the prerequisite. It is the starting place. We can say that we wish to experience peace on earth. We can hold hands and sing and sway. But unless and until we are ready, willing, and able to accept responsibility for our own consciousness, nothing's going to change. Nothing is going to change in our lives. Because we'll be waiting for somebody out there to do it. We'll be waiting for somebody else to do it. So this is the human view of the world. We'll have peace when everybody else stops picking on us. We'll have peace when? We'll have peace when this happens, when that happens. Hunger will cease being a problem on this planet when. And we have to stop and realize that all of these situations, all of these circumstances, all of these things that we think of as being not peaceful in the world are there by right of human consciousness. Louise Hay, in one of her books, said there's more than enough food in the world to feed everyone. People aren't going to bed hungry because of lack of food in the world. They're going to bed hungry because of lack of love. And love, as I describe it, is the experience of unity. Do we truly feel one with? Do we truly love those who are suffering? Do we truly love the refugees? Do we truly love the people whose lives are being disturbed by war? Do we truly love the people in the areas where militaries go in and leave landmines behind? Don't even clean up their mess. Just leave landmines behind for children to get hurt on. It is consciousness. It is the lack of thoughtfulness. Perhaps it is Osho says, it is the entire human race suffering under the delusion that each one is the most important one in the world. I am the most important person in the world. It is the delusion that the human race is suffering from. People can go do as they wish without regard to what consequences it has on another. And we can understand that that is just thought, that is just belief, see? That is just consciousness, and consciousness can and will change. So as Gandhi said, we must become the change we wish to see in the world. If we wish to see more peace in the world, we must become more peaceful ourselves. If we wish to see more love in the world, we must become more loving ourselves. The prayer of St. Francis says, "O Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there's hatred, let me sow love." We are already the instruments of God's peace. And the question is how much? How much of this light are we letting to shine through us? So we must recognize that there's more to peace than talking about it. There's more to peace than waiting for it. There's more to peace than expecting somebody else to do it to us or do it for us. We must become peaceful. Emmett Fox tells a story about trying to give away something that you don't have, you know. And he said that during the First World War, there was a group of people in the United States, and I think Henry Ford might have been the leader of the pack, or at least part of the leaders of the pack. And they leased a ship, a private ship, and they were going to sail to Europe and visit the capitals of Europe on this ship. And they were going to talk to the leaders of the different countries, and they were going to talk to them. Excuse me, gotta get a drink of water again. They were going to talk to the leaders about peace. But they never got there because they couldn't agree on how they were going to do it. In other words, they were fighting amongst themselves, and therefore they couldn't go talk to others about peace. So I invite you to consider then, what is this thing we call peace? You know, is it the cessation of hostilities? Is it the absence of war? Is it those kind of lulls in human activity when everything seems to be going my way? We've got the 4 freedoms. We feel happy. We're free from want. We're free from fear. We have freedom of speech, we have freedom of religion, the four freedoms. Or is there more to it than that? And I suggest that there's more to it than that. That peace is something that we must experience within. And the only place we'll find that is within. We'll not find it looking out there. We can look high, we can look low, we can go wide, we can go far. But if it's not within us, we will not find it out there. So the first requirement then, if we wish to truly experience peace in our lives, right, we got to stop looking at the splinter in our brother's eyes, and we have to first turn and deal with the plank in our own eyes. We have to recognize that peace is an inside job. Peace is a result of consciousness. And if we are to experience peace, it's up to us. If it's going to be, it's up to me. We have to make that dedication to our own lives. So now we stop and think, well, is peace the natural state, or is peace a state that we have to struggle to arrive at, you know? And if we think about what God is, we recognize that the divine must be peaceful, for there is nothing to struggle with God, and God cannot struggle with itself. It can only act in its own self-interest. Everything that it makes works perfectly with everything else that it makes. Everything works together for the highest good, you know. If we can just keep human beings out of the picture, things seem to work okay. But what has happened is this jewel of the soul, this jewel of what we truly are, this gem, to use the illustration that comes to us from the East, it's like it's laying in a shallow pond. And we're trying to get to it, but we're moving our hands in the water frantically. And we're creating all of these ripples on the surface, and the ripples are reflecting the sunlight back into our eyes, and we can't see down through the surface of the water because of all of the confusion. And our hands are moving around in the shallow water, and we're stirring up the mud. And there's this beautiful jewel. It's right there. It's right there within reach. But the harder we struggle to get to it, the more impossible it becomes. So we have to recognize that peace is the natural state of our being. It is the isness, it is the suchness, it is the I amness of life. Somewhere in the scripture it says, if God be with me, who can be against me? But all of God is with us, and all of God is for us, and none of God is against us. Now, traditional theology gives us a person, it gives us a personality, it gives us a Satan or a devil, and it blames all of our shortcomings on this other being that is somehow opposed to God, that God created, and now it opposes God. And I view that as a metaphor. I view that as a teaching story. That which is perfect cannot create that which is imperfect. And the divine would not allow a force of evil to exist. This Satan that was represented to us in the Old Testament was not the devil that we have in the New Testament. But it is that part of ourselves, it is that part of us that gets in our own way. It is that part of our consciousness that trips us up. It is that part of our consciousness that leads us astray. So we have this goodness, we have this peace, we have this love, we have this joy, we have the qualities of God that created us out of itself. And yet they're cloaked in ignorance. Again, to use an analogy from the East, they're cloaked in ignorance, like we've had layers of ignorance heaped upon us. We left the garden. We withdrew from that conscious awareness of the presence of God. We withdrew into this world to have a unique experience, to develop a unique personality, and then to return back to that oneness with our uniqueness. And in so doing, we have forgotten. This is where I believe the ignorance comes from. We have forgotten. Not completely. There's still something within us that remembers that spark, you know. There's still something within us that wants to go home. It's like I said last week. It's like that church bell that's ringing in the village in which we were raised. We hear that bell ring and we know we're home. And there's a part of us that knows that there's something better. That knows that we are more than this. So what is it that causes this lack of peace in the human experience? And it's our thoughts. It's human mind. It's human consciousness. We have thoughts of division. We're not like those people over there. Our intellect analyzes and divides. Our ego gets ready to fight and rail. And the symbolism that we're given both in the Old Testament and in Buddhism is of the two guards at the gate, the two cherubim at the gate. Remember the story in Genesis? Adam and Eve were cast out, and the two angels, the cherubim, were put at the gate to keep them from getting back into the garden. Our intellect, our ego, our fears, our desires, different ways we hear these two explained. In order for us to enter back into that peace, we have to overcome our fears and our desires. We have to overcome our intellect and our ego. It's an inside job. We must be willing to do the spiritual practice that tears down these ideas that tear us apart. For if it weren't for the ideas that we allow to tear us apart, the peace that is already there would come forth. So by now I hope we kind of can nod our heads and say, yes, peace or lack of peace is a function of consciousness. It is something I must take responsibility for in my own life. I cannot wait for someone else to do it for me or to do it to me. For I could be in the most peaceful place in the world, and if my consciousness was not at rest, I would find something to complain about, something to criticize, something to be afraid of. Imagine if everything just started going right one day, you would say, this is a trap, this is a trick. What are they doing to us? Nothing's ever gone this well before. We'd be suspicious because we lack peace in our own hearts. So we must come to the realization then that this thing that we call peace is a way of being, as Spinoza said. It is a way of life. It is something that we must be, not something that we must know or something that we must do, but it is something that we must be. And the process of becoming more peaceful in our lives is not a process of fighting for it and fighting others for it. It is a process of letting go of everything in our consciousness that is not peaceful. In Hinduism, there's an image. I believe it's of Kali. I think Kali is the goddess of destruction. And you'll recognize it when you see the picture. When I describe it, you'll probably recognize having seen it. But in this picture, the goddess looks like a cannibal woman, and she's dancing around a fire, and there's death and destruction all around. And she has like a hula skirt on, but around her waist there's a belt, and the belt has all bones and skulls hanging off of it. I think she's got bones in each hand, and she's dancing around this fire. And to the Western mind, the imagery doesn't mean anything to us. We kind of look at that and say, isn't that odd? Isn't that superstitious? But Joseph Campbell, in his works, he asks us to think about it. And here's a simple explanation. If you look at the energy centers, if you look at the chakras, which kind of represent areas of where our focused attention is as we develop and mature, the first thing that we are focused on is survival. And the second thing is procreation. And then the third thing is power and control. Those are the first three chakras. And that's where most of the human existence takes place. If you look at what's going on in politics, it's all there. If you look at what's going on in the news, it's all the first three chakras. If you look at what's going on in the soap operas, it's all about the first three chakras. But it's not until we get to the heart chakra, it's not until we start to get to the heart where the human and the divine really start to interact. In Jewish mysticism, they talk about the mineral, the vegetable, the animal, and the speaker. They don't even talk about the human. They talk about the speaker. We have to reach the point in maturity of our consciousness where we start to take responsibility for ourselves. We start to speak our own word. And what Campbell tells us is that when we reach that level, when we start to begin our spiritual journey in earnest, that we must turn around and with all of the fury that we use to attack everyone and everything out there at the level of the first three chakras, we must now be willing to turn to dissolve the ideas in our own consciousness that are not in harmony with the truth of peace, with the truth of being. So I don't want to set up a struggle. We can't fight our way to peace. You can't borrow your way out of debt. You can't fight your way to peace. We're not talking about that. But what I'm talking about is becoming consciously aware of the things within us that are not like peace, and to being dedicated to eliminating those things from our consciousness. Can we catch ourselves in the act of being unpeaceful? We don't want to do that. We don't want to admit that. Say, oh no, it's not me. You need to go talk to my in-laws. They're the ones that need to hear this. I'm talking about each and every one of us. I'm talking about each and every one of us. What are the thoughts that we have that divide? What are the thoughts that we have that are fearful? What are the thoughts that we have that are angry? And can we observe ourselves when we are having those thoughts? And can we detach ourselves from those thoughts? And so here's the difference. Something happens and I say, I'm angry. I'm angry that happened. I am engaged with that angry thought. I own that angry thought. I have become that angry thought. I am an angry person now. But when we learn to detach, see, we can at the instant that thought starts to arise, we can say, oh, there's an angry thought. Now there's a difference, you see. I'm not an angry person. I am the one observing the angry thought. I'm detached from it. I no longer own it. It's not mine. So if we wish to be peaceful, part of our journey is becoming aware of the thoughts that arise that we have previously identified as our thoughts and taken responsibility for and taken ownership of, and just letting them go. Just letting them go. And this is why meditation is so important. This is why meditation as a spiritual practice helps us grow, because if you've ever tried to meditate, you know that as soon as you sit down and you try to meditate, your mind is taking you all over the place. Right? Osho says it's like our mind is like a stray dog and we follow it. Wherever it goes, we're with it. We're right there, you know. And over time, what we learn is to just let the thoughts go. These are the ripples on the surface of the pond. And we're trying to find that peaceful jewel that's down there sitting on the bottom. And instead, we're paying attention to the ripples on the surface. We're paying attention to the ideas in consciousness. So if we wish to experience peace, we must develop some sort of a practice that we're dedicating our lives to peace. We can talk about peace all day long. We can sing about peace all day long. We can hold hands and sway about peace all year long. But unless and until we become willing to sit down and practice peace within ourselves, we will not have it. The second thing that we can do, now mind you, all of this is predicated upon I must take responsibility for my own consciousness. I must take responsibility for my own peaceful experience. That's the starting point. Then how do I do that? So I can learn to practice meditation. I can find a meditation technique that works for me. I can try different techniques. You know, when we were doing the meditation classes at the center, I was working from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which is like 113 different meditation techniques. I was working from kind of Osho's translation and Osho's expansion of the ideas in there. 113 different techniques to meditate. You're bound to find one that you like and then stay with it. And if that one stops working for you, find another. But we must learn not to become entangled with our thoughts. It's a prerequisite. It's that simple. We can't have peace if we're willing to engage our thoughts which are not peaceful, or to engage those thoughts which are not peaceful. Let's not even take ownership for them. And then the second thing that we can do is we can learn to just be with the light. The instant we turn on the light, the darkness leaves the room. There's that part of us which is light. There's that part of us which is already peaceful. There is that part of us which has never been afraid. There is that part of us which only loves us, which only loves each other. Now we must take time to simply be with it. However we can, whatever works for us. For some people, it might be a walk in nature. Sitting at the ocean, watching the waves, sitting outside on a starry night and just getting lost in the vastness of the universe, looking at the images from the Hubble telescope. Holding a baby and rocking it in a rocking chair. Whatever works for us that takes us beyond thought, back beyond thought, right? And so the peace is there. It precedes the thought, but the thoughts are kind of clouding us from seeing it. It's kind of like we're looking back through this veil of our crazy thoughts, and we're trying to find the peace, and we need to get through that veil. We need to step to the other side of that veil. So we can take time to simply be. Not to talk to God, not to treat, not to pray, not to read, not to study, but just to be. Just to be. And again, we must practice that. See, it takes a dedicated practice. Now sometimes we say, I don't have time for that. When am I going to get time to do all this practice? Well, we've got plenty of time to be angry. We've got plenty of time to be afraid. We've got plenty of time to worry about the things in the world. We just have to take some of that time that we spend being fearful or angry or worrisome, and we have to repurpose it. We all have 24 hours in a day. What is more important than experiencing the peace? So we observe our thoughts during the day. We're going through the day and something happens and we start to get caught up into it. And we realize that we're not as peaceful as we want to be, and we take a breath and we step back. Just take a breath and step back in consciousness. I don't have to respond this way. I don't have to be caught up in it this way. Excuse me. I choose to find a way of peace. And then the other thing that we can do is we can bless everyone. And by this I mean seeing the presence of God within everyone. Now, it's easy to do so in our family, in our friends, in our pets, in those we love. We love them because we feel one with them. But can we see it in those we are afraid of? Can we see it in our enemies? Can we see it in those people, whoever they happen to be, those people? Can we recognize that they too are the love of God? That the peace is already within them. And as Dr. Holmes says, when deep calls unto deep, deep answers. Can we call to each other at the level of the soul? And avoid our human tendency to be afraid and to demonize our enemies. Can we see the peace and the harmony in all of God's creation? Can we look upon the blessings of nature, the activity of the birds, the squirrels gathering their nuts and running around the yard, the fishes in the sea? Can we make time? Can we make time to experience the peace? So I would guess that there's not anything that, if you could sum up, every human desire, if you could sum it up, I would think that we are striving for peace. But as Pema Chodron, the Buddhist monk, tells us, we as human beings are interesting creatures because we say we want one thing and we immediately go out and do that which is completely opposite of what we say we want. She gave an example. At one time she was asked to write a book on peace, and she kept procrastinating and putting it off until finally she only had a couple weeks for the deadline, and she thought she had to get up in the middle of the night and work all night long on her book while her family slept, and she would get up to work in the middle of the night, and other people in the household would get up and they would annoy her, and here she was writing a book on peace, and she was completely stressed out. And we tend to do that. So recognize that which keeps us from experiencing peace are our fears and our desires. Our fears and our desires. And these are not all our desires. These are the desires that would be at somebody else's expense. Ernest Holmes tells us if our desire gives a greater expression of life and of love and of truth and of beauty, and if it harms no one and robs no one of anything, then go for it. So our selfish desires, our human desires are what we're talking about. Our fears are where we feel separated. And as long as we feel separated, we can't experience in peace. So we can recognize that each day is a learning opportunity, because as fears and desires come up, we can examine them. We can observe them. We can say, does this lead to a greater experience of peace or not? And if not, just leave it alone. Leave it where it is. Detach from it. It is up to each and every one of us to take responsibility for our own consciousness, our own thoughts, our own emotions. I see this so much, particularly on social media. I see people posting things about They can't help but respond a certain way when somebody disrespects them, or somebody says this, or somebody says that. And I have to restrain from jumping in the middle of that and responding. Yes, you can. You can respond differently. You can see it differently. But we have to try. We have to try. So it's up to me. If I wish to see peace in the world, I must become the peace I wish to see. I start by taking responsibility for my own consciousness and recognizing that nobody else can control that except me. And I don't always do such a bang-up job of that myself. I can take time to learn how to observe my thoughts so that I don't become entangled with them. I can take time to just simply be with the peace. Step back away from the distraction of the intellect and the ego and just be with God, be with my beloved. And as I learn to experience that peace within myself, then I can look out to others and I can see that that same peace is within them, ready, willing, and able to bubble up within them. And at their time and at their place, they too will accept their own responsibility. But until then, I can't whack them over the head with a peace pole and make them do it. In fact, my desire to do that is distracting me from my own responsibility. So I invite you this year, as we enter into 2018 together, I invite you this year, please consider it, to whatever your effort in previous years has been, please consider it an opportunity to increase your desire for peace, your willingness to accept a responsibility for that experience, and begin a practice or increase your practice, a dedicated practice, because without your practice nothing will change. Let peace begin on earth, and let it begin right here with me and with you and with every one of us. And so it is.